Welcome to another best wildcard team video ahead of Game Week 35. We did one last week and it was a bit different where I talked about a wildcard team for those of you specifically with the free hit left in Game Week 37, but not necessarily to actually be really helpful with your bench boost. But this team will address those concerns. So if you're looking to play the wildcard this week, you wanted to maybe hold off for another week, you already had some Chelsea players, then this is the video for you. So let's get straight into this. What hasn't changed from last week's video are the goalkeepers. So Schmeichel got 8 points last week with a save point, a clean sheet and also a bonus point, and Foster would be there as the backup goalkeeper. I think this is the ideal goalkeeper pairing for a bench boost. Both of them have doubles. Watford aren't great. They probably won't keep any clean sheets. And if they do, maybe one and hopefully would be in Game Week 36 for you. And also, they rotate pretty well. So in Game Week 35, when Schmeichel plays Tottenham, you might want to bench him. And then Foster plays Burnley at home. Although Burnley have looked pretty good actually recently since they sacked Sean Dyche, which is quite surprising. The other goalkeeper, funnily enough, that I would recommend is Nick Pope. I wouldn't really look at the other goalkeepers right now. Ramsdale could improve, especially Tomiyasu returning, and he should be starting in the next couple of games. But otherwise, I'm not really a big fan of all the goalkeepers right now, and therefore I would go for these two. And if not, there is Nick Pope as well. If you have enough funds, then ideally it would be Schmeichel and Pope. But then if you're bench boosting in 36, Nick Pope faces Aston Villa at home, whilst Foster has a double game week. So therefore, I probably would just go for something like this. A very similar looking defence as well with Joao Cancelo, Robertson and Trent, but I would highly recommend Laporte or Matip if you can't afford one of these fullbacks. I think if I had to pick one substitution for the other, it would be Laporte in place of Joao Cancelo. I don't think the difference between those two is as big as Matip with the Liverpool fullbacks, but then again, Matip is a bonus points machine and he's been playing the vast majority of the Premier League games while Konate is playing in the Champions League. So let me know what you think of that, but I think I would still go for Cancelo, Trent and Robertson if possible. If you don't have enough budget, then I would highly recommend one of those centre-back alternatives from Liverpool and City, and especially we're talking about Laporte and Matip. I would go for Matty Cash. He's got back-to-back doubles in 36 and 37, as well as great fixtures from 35 onwards, starting with Norwich. And then we've got Marcos Alonso, starting off Game Week 34 with a 10-pointer, and he's been a far better pick recently than Reece James, who has kind of been managed by Thomas Tuchel. It looks like it was actually just more of a precaution more than anything else, and he's not actually injured, but they're trying to ease him back into it. And whilst Reece James could play against Everton and also the subsequent game there, I still would go for Marcos Alonso instead. And I think this is the ideal back five. Once again, there's a few differences that you could make here and there. Emerson Royal at 4.5 million, Ben Davies at 4.4, maybe a Crystal Palace defender, and otherwise there's a few other alternatives like the City and Liverpool centre-backs that I mentioned. But ultimately, I think this back five will do the job for you, and ultimately Alonso right now is the best Chelsea defender. We've taken a bit of money out of the midfield by going for Gordon, but he's just a fifth midfielder, a pure bench fodder option who has back-to-back doubles in 36 and 37. So this is definitely ideal if you don't have the free hit, for example, and the same goes for Matty Cash. But Bukayo Saka should be fine, but he did pick up a knock after the Chelsea game heading into that Manchester United fixture. He still played well, came off a bit early, and I would have a bit of a doubt potentially, but I would still expect him to play in Game Week 35 onwards. And he's on penalties now with Lacazette out of the team, so long as the Frenchman isn't in the starting 11, then Saka should be good there for the set pieces. Then you've got Mohamed Salah. He speaks for himself. As much as I would love to say go for Diaz or Jota, their minutes is always going to be a concern for me. Matip, that isn't the case, and that's why I highly recommended him in the defence, but I don't have that same certainty with those other wingers for Liverpool. And even Sadio Mane, a really good option, but would you go for him over Salah? Despite his really good form, I probably wouldn't. De Bruyne, though, you can't ignore him. He's been so consistent. He's been getting assists, goals. I mean, that pass he made for Gabriel Jesus against Watford was incredible, and no other player, in my opinion, in the Premier League can do that. So I would go for De Bruyne right now. And with Spurs really struggling and having 0 shots on target in the last 2 weeks, I wouldn't go for triple Spurs attack. Even 2 might seem a little bit too much right now. Of course, football's a funny game. Things can change very quickly. If Harry Kane drops a bit deeper and Conte can get something clicking out of the wing backs, then they could definitely start scoring again. But I think 1 is enough. Heung-min Son is still a fantastic option and he offers better value than De Bruyne, but with City's fixtures and also De Bruyne's form, it's very hard to ignore him. And Kulusevski could be a decent kind of cover, and I don't like that word too much, but he could be decent coverage for Spurs attack, and he does have that double in 36, which isn't great, but then great fixtures before and afterwards. So ultimately this midfield 5 is pretty solid, but there are a few alternatives which I'll discuss later on in this video as well. Up front, we've gone for something quite different. So Timo Pukki still remains from last week's team, but we've gone for Watkins and Dennis. Now, in last week's video, I talked about skipping Watkins, and to be honest, I'm not a big fan of him. But if you don't have that free hit in 37 to use, and you also need someone for the bench boost, I think Watkins solves a lot of your problems there. And even if he blanks, he can get those appearance points. Now, I don't certainly think he's a great option. I think Ivan Toney could arguably be a better option. You've got Harry Kane, of course, and a few others. Even Weghorst is showing a bit of decent form, although I probably wouldn't buy him at this point. So I'm not too sure if Ollie Watkins is the solution, but he definitely is a pretty useful player in terms of the fixtures, as well as the quantity and quality of those fixtures. Emmanuel Dennis has a decent double in 36, and he's also got very good fixtures until the end of the season. He could still get some returns, as he showed in the last 2 games, an assist against Man City as well, and he could have gotten more points if he had kept his composure against Zinchenko. But Pukki I still like, despite his blank against Newcastle. Norwich are a very poor team, so don't expect too much from him. He's 6 million after all, but I would go quite small up front. There is Richarlison as well to consider, but I would go for a pool of strikers like this, and if you're looking to bench boost in 36, then this is probably what I'd end up doing. In terms of budget, this would cost 105.4 million. So let me just show you a few alternatives that you could do. So going around the team quite quickly, let's say, for example, you can't afford something or you want to go a bit different and go bigger in midfield, for example. What I would consider is getting rid of one of the Liverpool fullbacks, and you could go to Joel Matip. That is one thing you could do. So let's go for Matip there, maybe for Trent. Robertson's been in great form. I'd argue in even better form than Trent Alexander-Arnold. And another thing you could do is go for Aymeric Laporte instead of Joao Cancelo. That's something else that you could do. But with this extra money, and in my case, I have 2.5 million. So instead of Gordon, I could go about things a bit differently and perhaps go for someone like Coutinho. But one other thing you could do, let's say, for example, if you can't do it, get Aymeric Laporte for Cancelo. And then up front, you could maybe dead end one of those forward positions. You could go to Greenwood. And to be fair, whenever he's come off the bench, he's actually made an impact, gotten some points as well. So you could consider Greenwood if you're looking for a striker around 5.4 million or under. But there's also Eddie Nketiah, who you could actually keep your eye on. Now, I don't expect him to start every single game until the end of the season, but against West Ham, he should start so long as he's fully fit. You know, there were a few concerns heading into the United game, and Arteta said this with some Arsenal players, including Saka, Ben White, and also Nketiah, amongst other players. So I think Xhaka was the 4th one that he mentioned. So I would go for something like this if you wanted to change things up a little bit. I think a triple up in Villa isn't too bad, but ultimately, if you have that free hit, do you really need to go really big on the villains, especially when they've been pretty lackluster for the last 5 or 6 game weeks? I don't think so. 1 or 2 is enough, and if you have that free hit in your back pocket, you could even go without any of them, and I'm actually quite happy to get none of those players in. I can free hit them in Game Week 37, should I continue with that plan of free hitting in that game week. So that's just a few things to think about. Food for thought. Let me know what you think. In terms of the captaincy, I think I would go for De Bruyne this week, with Salah being my vice captain. Obviously, let me know as well what you think. I'd be very interested to see your thoughts in the comment section down below. Now let me show you a bit of an alternative draft with even more different players, including the likes of Heung-min Son. This team would be identical in price. I've got a few players that remain, such as Saka, Dennis, but of course you can change them. No one is essential in my opinion, even Salah, who has been showing a bit of his class in the last 2 game weeks. But Ivan Toney, Richarlison, who I mentioned, you could go for them, especially if you're not that bothered about the bench boost. You know, Toney still has a good fixture in that game week, and he could do very well in Game Week 36, so you don't need to just fill your team with double Game Week players, in my opinion, especially when Toney, apart from the last 2 game weeks where he's been blanking, but he's been very consistent for the last 10 game weeks or so, and he was very unlucky not to score against Spurs. Richarlison's a good double game week player. I don't trust Everton personally, and if I had to go for any player apart from Gordon, it would be Richarlison. Nick Pope in goal instead of Kasper Schmeichel could be something you could look at. There's Laporte, obviously, as I kept talking about, Matip, Emerson Royale. Instead of Alonso even, you could go for Antonio Rudiger, who should be back fairly soon, although it looks like he's heading off to Real Madrid in the summer, so it depends what you think in terms of his headspace. Phil Foden from Manchester City, if you don't want to go for De Bruyne or don't have the funds to do so, you could go for him. Heung-min Son instead of Kulusevski. We can't ignore Kane. I still think he will start scoring and being a really crucial factor in the top 4 race. Salah, you could maybe go for Jota instead. I think if I had to pick one other Liverpool midfielder other than Salah, it would be Diego Jota. I think he will start more than Diaz in the Premier League, but I could be wrong about that. And it ultimately depends on how the Champions League lines up as well. So if Liverpool are in a comfortable lead against Villarreal, they might be able to afford to bench the likes of Diaz in the Champions League and start him in the Premier League, for example, to then build his momentum once again and his rhythm. Coutinho, as I talked about in the other draft, at the very end, tinkering with it, he could be someone to look at as well. I'm not a huge fan of him recently. In the last 5 or 6 game weeks, he has looked pretty lackluster, looked pretty decent against Spurs, but then tailed off very quickly, was very poor against Arsenal as well, and Aston Villa just haven't been at it. So there's a lot of different things you could do with the wild card, but ultimately, if you are looking to bench boost in 36, I would go for what I showed you in the first draft, although a few changes could be made there as well, once again, and you don't need to do everything like for like, and you might have some preferences. For example, Heung-min Son over De Bruyne, or maybe you want to go big up front with Harry Kane. But I personally would go for a structure like this, or even in the first team as well. Let me know what you think of this team down in the comment section below. In terms of the captaincy, with this team in particular, it would be Salah or Son, and at the moment I would lean more towards Salah, and that's why I think with the first team, I would go for De Bruyne, a bit of a differential captaincy against Leeds. And despite how good Jesse Marsch has done at Leeds, I would still expect City to score quite a few past them, and De Bruyne will be a very big part of that. There is going to be the Champions League rotation, and that will be playing a big part for City and Liverpool, so that's something else to consider. But City should have that double in 36, and it could be announced by the time this video drops out, so take that into account. It's probably going to go into double Game Week 36 rather than double Game Week 37, which isn't ideal for those free hitting in Game Week 37, but there you go. These things can happen. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a single upload or stream. There's going to be a UCL Fantasy stream tomorrow on the Tuesday, and that's for match day 11. That's going to be really good. 5 free transfers. What am I going to do? Am I going to go for squad depth, or am I going to go really big in midfield with Sadio Mane and Kevin De Bruyne? Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram as well to keep up to date with my teams, as well as the latest FPL and UCL Fantasy news. Let me know if you want to see F1 Fantasy content throughout the summer, and I could even do one before the Miami race in race week 5 within 2 weeks, and there could be a team selection video for that, deadline streams, as well as much more content. I'm open to ideas and also your suggestions, so thank you very much as always. Take care, enjoy the football and the F1 potentially in this case. Good luck with double Game Week 34. There's still going on, there's a few matches left to be played, as well as Game Week 35, which is the next one on our agenda, and I'll see you next time.